The beach stretches before you like a wound torn open in reality itself. Black water laps against shores that shouldn't exist, where the skeletal remains of massive ship masts pierce the fog like broken ribs. The air tastes of salt and decay, thick with the weight of something ancient and wrong. And there, at the edge of this impossible shore, lies the corpse of a god. Her pale flesh has long since grown cold, this great one they call Kos, mother of orphans, washed up from depths that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. But you're not here for her. No, you've come for what waits inside her lifeless womb, for the thing that has haunted the dreams of every blood-drunk hunter since the first blade tasted beast flesh in the streets of Yharnam. The moment you approach, something tears itself free from that divine corpse. It emerges screaming, this thing that should never have been born, skeletal and twisted, dragging behind it the very placenta that once nourished it in death. The Orphan of Kos raises its makeshift weapon and shrieks at the dark sun above, a sound that carries within it decades of rage, centuries of torment, and the weight of a curse that has trapped countless souls in this eternal nightmare. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 Lore, where today we're unraveling one of gaming's most haunting tales of cosmic horror and human atrocity. This is the story of how a single act of sacrilege, one terrible murder committed in the name of enlightenment, cursed not just those who wielded the blade, but their spiritual descendants for generations to come. The Orphan of Kos represents the beating heart of Bloodborne's central tragedy, the original sin that set in motion every horror that would follow in the cobblestone streets of Yharnam. To understand the weight of this curse, we need to journey back before the blood ministrations, before the beast plague, before the hunters ever raised their weapons against the night. We need to return to a small fishing village on the coast, where the boundaries between our world and the cosmos grew thin, and where humanity first committed an unforgivable crime against beings far beyond our understanding. This isn't just the tale of a murdered infant god, though that horror stands at its center. This is the story of how ambition and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge transformed from noble scholarly pursuit into something far darker. How the sins of the past echo through time itself, and how sometimes the universe itself demands justice for crimes we can barely comprehend. The horror of what happened at the Fishing Hamlet goes deeper than simple murder. When Byrgenwerth scholars and their hunters descended upon that cursed shore, they didn't just kill, they desecrated, experimented, and violated both the living and the dead in their desperate search for evolution, for eyes on the inside, for the secret to transcending humanity itself. And in doing so, they awakened something that would haunt their bloodline forever. Long before the expedition that would doom them all, the Fishing Hamlet existed as an isolated community on a fog-shrouded coast. The villagers there lived simple lives, casting their nets into waters that held secrets older than human memory. Then one day, perhaps during a particularly violent storm, perhaps guided by cosmic currents we can't understand, the corpse of Kos washed ashore. She was already dead when she arrived. This great one from the deepest reaches of the ocean, her massive form bloated with parasites that writhed beneath her pale skin. The villagers discovered her on their beach like a message from the depths, pregnant and lifeless, a goddess denied her chance at motherhood. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Bloodborne's darkest secrets so far, I genuinely appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow hunters and lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth explorations of gaming's most intricate narratives coming. Now, what happened next at the Fishing Hamlet defies conventional understanding. The villagers didn't flee from this eldritch corpse as we might expect. Instead, they revered her. They called her Mother Kos, and through their worship, through their proximity to her divine remains, they began to change. The parasites that infested the dead, great one's body spread to the villagers, but rather than killing them, these organisms transformed them into something between human and sea creature. Their skulls expanded to accommodate new growths, their bodies adapted to both land and water, and most significantly, they developed what Master Willem would later desperately seek, eyes on the inside. The transformation wasn't horrific to the villagers themselves. They saw it as a blessing, a gift from their departed mother goddess. They tended to Kos's corpse with religious devotion, built shrines from whale bones and driftwood, and sang hymns that human throats shouldn't have been able to produce. The parasites gave them longevity, enhanced perception, and a connection to truths that existed beyond the veil of normal reality. In their transformed state, they could perceive dimensions and possibilities that baseline humanity remained blind to. They had achieved, through symbiosis with cosmic parasites, what the scholars of Byrgenwerth would later kill to obtain. The Fishing Hamlet became a place outside time, where the normal rules of reality bent and twisted like light through water. The villagers' children were born with the parasites already integrated into their biology, creating a new branch of human evolution that occurred not over millions of years, but in a single generation. They still cast their nets, still maintained their boats, but now they did so with awareness of currents that flowed through more than just the physical ocean. They could sense the movement of things in the spaces between spaces, feel the pull of the cosmos in their transformed blood. This hidden paradise of transcendent horror might have remained undiscovered indefinitely if not for the scholarly ambitions brewing at Byrgenwerth College. Master Willem, the provost of that prestigious institution, had dedicated his life to understanding the ruins of the ancient Pumerian civilization and the old blood they had discovered beneath Yharnam. His research had led him to a singular conclusion. Humanity's evolution had stagnated, and the only path forward lay in fundamental transformation of human consciousness itself. He believed that by developing eyes on the inside, by literally growing new organs of perception within the brain, humanity could ascend to a higher plane of existence. If you're finding value in uncovering these buried truths about the Fishing Hamlet so far, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts who delve deep into gaming's most intricate narratives. Your support truly makes these extensive investigations possible, allowing us to piece together the fragments of stories that lesser channels might overlook. Willem's obsession with internal eyes wasn't mere metaphor. The Pumerian ruins had shown him evidence of a civilization that had achieved this transformation, and the old blood found there carried within it properties that could alter human physiology at the cellular level. But progress had been slow, the transformations incomplete or unstable. When rumors reached Byrgenwerth of a coastal village where people had developed precisely the kind of enhanced perception Willem sought, he knew he had to investigate. The expedition he organized would include some of the college's most promising students and associates, Lauritz, who would later found the Healing Church, Mikolash, who would establish the School of Mensis, and perhaps most importantly, Gehrman, the first hunter, and his student Lady Maria. The inclusion of hunters in what should have been a scholarly expedition tells us everything we need to know about Byrgenwerth's true intentions. They didn't travel to the Fishing Hamlet for peaceful research or voluntary collaboration. They came as conquerors, as thieves, prepared to take by force what the villagers had received as a gift. Gehrman brought his curved blade and his supernatural speed. Maria carried her rakuyo, the twin-bladed weapon she wielded with deadly precision. They were accompanied by other hunters whose names have been lost to history, men and women who had honed their skills against beasts and were now being asked to turn those skills against transformed humans who had committed no crime except existing in a state Byrgenwerth coveted. The expedition arrived at the Fishing Hamlet on a gray morning when the fog hung so thick you could barely see 10 feet ahead. The first thing they noticed was the smell, that mixture of salt, decay, and something else, something that made their eyes water and their stomachs turn. Then came the sounds, the irregular splashing of things moving through shallow water, the creaking of boats that moved without wind, and underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to come from the village itself, as if the buildings were singing in frequencies human ears weren't meant to detect. When they encountered the first villagers, the scholars' academic excitement must have been overwhelming. Here were living examples of successful human transformation, people who had achieved the evolution Willem sought through symbiosis with parasitic organisms from a great one. The villagers' expanded craniums, their additional sensory organs, their ability to perceive multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. It was everything Byrgenwerth had theorized made manifest. But the villagers weren't specimens to be studied. They were people with families, with customs, with a deep spiritual connection to their deceased mother goddess. The exact moment when observation turned to violence remains unclear in the historical record. Perhaps the villagers refused to share their secrets. Perhaps they tried to protect Kos's corpse from the outsiders. Or perhaps, and this seems most likely given what followed, Byrgenwerth had always intended to take what they wanted, regardless of consent. What we know with certainty is that the massacre was systematic, thorough, and cruel beyond measure. The hunters moved through the village with methodical precision, cutting down anyone who stood in the scholar's way. But killing wasn't enough for Byrgenwerth's purposes. They needed to understand the transformation, to study it, to replicate it. So they performed experiments on the still-living villagers, drilling into their skulls to extract the parasites and the evolved brain tissue. They removed eyes, both normal and internal, preserving them in specialized containers for later study. The screams that echoed through the fog that day were unlike anything the cosmos had heard before, the agony of beings caught between human and divine, violated by those who saw them as nothing more than research materials. Lady Maria participated in this slaughter, though every account suggests she grew increasingly horrified as the day progressed. She had been trained to hunt beasts, monsters that threatened humanity's survival. But the villagers, transformed as they were, remained fundamentally human in their fear, their pain, their desperate attempts to protect their children. Maria's rakuyo, those elegant twin blades she wielded with such grace, became stained with innocent blood that no amount of cleaning would ever truly remove. The villagers who survived the initial assault tried to hide in their cathedral, a structure built from whale bones and driftwood, where they had worshipped Mother Kos. They barricaded the doors, gathered their children, and prayed to their departed goddess for salvation. They called out to Kos in languages that predated human speech, begging her to save them from the hunter's blades. But the dead can't intervene in the affairs of the living, at least not directly. The hunters broke through the barricades, and what happened inside that cathedral was so horrific that even the expedition's own records barely mention it. Among the scholars, the excitement of discovery overrode any moral qualms. They collected samples of everything: blood, tissue, parasites, even the transformed organs of perception. They documented the villagers' mutations with clinical detachment, measuring skull dimensions, cataloging extrasensory organs, taking detailed notes on the integration of parasitic tissue with human biology. To them, this wasn't murder, it was research. The villagers weren't people, they were subjects. Their transformation wasn't a blessing, it was data to be harvested and analyzed. The true atrocity, the act that would transform a massacre into a curse, came when the expedition discovered Kos's corpse. The Great One lay exactly where she had washed ashore, tended to by the few villagers who had managed to hide from the hunters. Her body had been decorated with offerings, surrounded by prayers carved in languages that hurt to read. And within her corpse, somehow still alive despite its mother's death, was the orphan. This unborn Great One existed in a state between life and death, sustained by cosmic forces beyond human comprehension, waiting for a birth that would never come naturally. The scholars were fascinated. Here was not just a transformed human, but an actual infant Great One. A being of pure cosmic significance, trapped in an eternal prenatal state. The opportunity for study, for understanding, for harvesting the secrets of the cosmos itself was too tempting to resist. The exact nature of what they did to the orphan remains mercifully unclear. Some accounts suggest they tried to extract it from Kos's corpse for experimentation. Others claim they killed it outright, seeing its death as necessary for their research. Still others theorize they somehow split its existence, trapping part of it in a state of perpetual undeath while taking other parts for study. What we know with certainty is that the orphan's treatment was the final violation that transformed atrocity into cosmic consequence. The dying villager's prayers, the desecration of Kos's corpse, and the violation of her unborn child created a resonance that echoed through dimensions humans weren't meant to perceive. The villagers called out for justice with their final breaths, not to any earthly authority, but to the cosmos itself. They cursed the hunters and scholars, begged Mother Kos to punish those who had destroyed their paradise, and in their dying moments, something heard them. The curse didn't manifest immediately. The expedition returned to Byrgenwerth with their specimens and samples, considering the mission a complete success despite the bloodshed. Willem examined the harvested eyes with fascination, studying their structure, trying to understand how parasitic integration had achieved what his experiments could not. Lawrence saw in the villagers' transformation a path toward the evolution of all humanity. Mikolash became obsessed with the cosmic truths the villagers had perceived. And Gehrman? Gehrman tried to forget the screams, to focus on the necessity of what they had done, to convince himself that the violence had served a greater purpose. But the Orphan of Kos was not dead, not truly. The violation of its physical form had created something far worse than death, an existence trapped between states, neither living nor deceased, eternally experiencing the moment of its own destruction. This paradox of being created a wound, in reality itself, a space where the normal rules of existence ceased to apply. And through that wound, the dying villagers' prayers found their answer. The cosmos responded not with immediate vengeance, but with something far more terrible, the hunter's nightmare. The hunter's nightmare didn't appear as a place at first. Instead, it began as dreams that plagued those who had participated in the massacre. Gehrman would wake screaming, convinced he was still on that beach, still cutting down villagers who begged for mercy. Maria found herself unable to clean the blood from her rakuyo no matter how many times she washed it. The other hunters reported similar experiences, nightmares so vivid they began to blur with waking reality. They would see the villagers in shadows, hear the orphans' unborn screams in the wind, feel the weight of cosmic judgment pressing down upon their souls. As time passed, the curse evolved, growing stronger with each act of violence committed by those connected to the original sin. The hunter's nightmare became an actual place, a dimension parallel to reality where the Fishing Hamlet existed in eternal repetition of its worst day. But it wasn't simply a recreation. It was a prison designed by cosmic intelligence, a punishment crafted to match the crime. Every hunter who had participated in the massacre would eventually be drawn there, not just in dreams, but in soul and consciousness, trapped forever in a cycle of violence that mirrored their original sin. The curse's true genius lay in its expansive nature. It didn't limit itself to the original perpetrators. The prayer of the villagers had been specific. Curse the fiends, their children too, and their children forever true. Every hunter who followed in the bloody footsteps of Gehrman and his companions, every person who gave in to bloodlust and the thrill of the hunt, became susceptible to the curse. The hunter's nightmare grew with each generation, collecting the souls of those who had embraced violence as a solution, trapping them in an eternal recursion of their own brutality. Within the hunter's nightmare, time operates differently. Hunters who died decades apart in the real world exist simultaneously in the nightmare, fighting endless battles that never truly resolve. They become drunk on blood that never satisfies, hunt beasts that always return, and slowly lose themselves to the very violence they once controlled. The nightmare versions of these hunters retain just enough consciousness to understand their fate, to know they're trapped, but not enough to break free. They become cautionary tales made flesh, warnings about the price of unchecked violence that no one in the waking world can properly hear. Lady Maria was among the first to fully understand the weight of what they had done. The guilt consumed her, eating away at her sanity like the parasites that had transformed the villagers. She threw her beloved rakuyo down a well, unable to bear the sight of the weapon that had spilled innocent blood. She attempted to help the patients of the research hall, victims of the experiments that used knowledge gained from the Fishing Hamlet massacre, but their suffering only reminded her of her crimes. Eventually, the weight became unbearable. Maria took her own life, slitting her throat in the astral clock tower, but death provided no escape. The curse pulled her into the hunter's nightmare, where she now stands eternal watch, preventing others from reaching the fishing hamlet and discovering the truth of Byrgenwerth's sins. Gehrman's fate proved equally tragic, though he lived much longer. The curse manifested differently for him, the first hunter, the one who had led the practical execution of the massacre. He found himself pulled into a different dream, created by the moon presence, a great one that may have been responding to the cosmic imbalance created by the orphan's suffering. The hunter's dream became Gehrman's prison, a workshop that existed outside normal time, where he would train new hunters, sending them to their deaths again and again in an endless cycle that mirrored his own violence. He became a tool of the very cosmos he had violated, forced to perpetuate the cycle of hunting that the curse demanded. Lawrence, who used the knowledge gained from the massacre to found the healing church, discovered that cosmic justice has a cruel sense of irony. He had sought evolution through the old blood, using insights gained from studying the villagers' transformation to develop the blood ministrations that would transform Yharnam. But the blood that was meant to elevate humanity instead degraded it, turning people into the very beasts they feared. Lawrence himself eventually succumbed to a particularly horrific transformation, becoming a burning cleric beast trapped forever in the hunter's nightmare, his body perpetually aflame as if the cosmos wanted to purify the corruption he had spread. The healing church that Lawrence founded became an engine for expanding the curse's reach. Every hunter trained by the church, every person who partook in blood ministration, every citizen who embraced the violence necessary to survive in beast-plagued Yharnam became another thread in the web of cosmic punishment. The church's hunters, trained in workshops that descended from Gehrman's techniques, inherited not just fighting styles, but spiritual contamination. They were taught that beasts were no longer human, that violence was purification, that the hunt was sacred. These beliefs made them perfect candidates for the hunter's nightmare, souls pre-condemned by the philosophies they embraced. Ludwig, the church's greatest hunter, exemplified this inherited damnation. He had never been to the fishing hamlet, had never raised his blade against the transformed villagers, but he had so thoroughly embraced the hunt's violence that the curse claimed him anyway. In the hunter's nightmare, Ludwig exists as a monstrous horse-like creature, having become the very type of beast he once hunted. Only his guiding moonlight sword retains any trace of his former nobility, a reminder of what he had believed himself to be before the curse revealed his true nature. The research hall, where the church conducted experiments using knowledge stolen from the fishing hamlet, became another focal point for the curse's manifestation. The patients there, subjected to procedures designed to create artificial eyes on the inside, experienced transformations that grotesquely parodied what the villagers had achieved through natural symbiosis. Their heads expanded not with evolved consciousness, but with tumorous growths and fluid. They gained not transcendent perception, but madness and agony. Lady Maria, trapped in her role as caretaker in the nightmare version of the research hall, tends to these victims eternally, forced to witness the ongoing consequences of the knowledge she helped steal. Mikolash, who founded the school of Mensis, took a different path that led to the same damnation. He attempted to contact the cosmos directly, to commune with great ones through rituals that bordered on madness. His Mensis ritual, which used umbilical cords and other materials that might have originated from the Fishing Hamlet expedition, succeeded in making contact, but at a terrible price. The school of Mensis became trapped in a nightmare of their own making, their consciousness pulled into cosmic spaces where human minds weren't meant to exist. Mikolash himself went mad, or perhaps achieved a kind of inverted enlightenment, understanding truths that destroyed his humanity while granting him terrible insights. The tragedy deepens when we consider the villagers themselves, the innocent victims whose transformation had been a blessing until Byrgenwerth arrived. In the hunter's nightmare, they exist in a state of perpetual suffering, forever reliving the day of their massacre. But unlike the hunters who are condemned to fight endlessly, the villagers retain more of their humanity, their consciousness, their ability to suffer. They remember their prayers to Mother Kos, remember their children being butchered, remember the moment their paradise became hell. Their anguish feeds the nightmare, providing the emotional foundation that keeps the entire dimension stable. The orphan itself exists at the heart of this cosmic punishment, neither fully born nor properly dead, trapped in a state of eternal emergence. Every moment, it experiences its violation anew, torn from its mother's corpse and subjected to whatever desecration the scholars performed. Its screams echo through dimensions, a sound that exists partially in the nightmare and partially in the waking world, audible to those who have begun their descent into blood drunkenness. The orphan has become the living embodiment of the curse, its suffering, the engine that drives the hunter's nightmare's existence. The weapon the orphan wields, its own placenta transformed into a tool of violence, represents a grotesque parody of the hunter's own practices. Just as the hunters turn tools of medicine and science into weapons, the orphan uses the very organ that should have nourished it in the womb as an instrument of destruction. When it attacks those who find it in the nightmare, it's not just fighting, it's demonstrating the fundamental perversion that violence represents, the transformation of life, giving forces into death, dealing ones. To truly understand the scope of this curse, we must recognize that it extends beyond individual damnation. The entire city of Yharnam fell under its shadow, though most of its citizens never knew the true cause of their suffering. The beast plague that ravaged the city streets was, in many ways, a macroscopic manifestation of the curse's principle. Just as the hunters were condemned to become what they hunted, the city that embraced blood ministration was condemned to transform into the very monsters it feared. The cosmic justice was poetic in its cruelty. Those who sought transcendence through violence and violation would achieve only degradation and bestiality. The relationship between the hunter's dream and the hunter's nightmare reveals another layer of cosmic complexity. The hunter's dream, created or at least maintained by the moon presence, serves as a kind of purgatorial space, a place where hunters can die and return, perpetuating cycles of violence without permanent consequence. But this apparent mercy is itself part of the punishment. By allowing hunters to resurrect and continue their bloody work, the dream ensures more souls will eventually fall to blood, drunkenness, and be claimed by the nightmare. The two dimensions work in tandem, one feeding the other, creating an engine of perpetual damnation. The doll, in the hunter's dream, animated by uncertain forces and caring for hunters with an artificial affection, might herself be a manifestation of cosmic irony. She resembles Lady Maria, the hunter whose guilt over the Fishing Hamlet drove her to suicide. The doll cares for hunters, strengthens them, enables them to become more efficient killers, all while wearing the face of someone who understood too late the horror of what hunters truly represent. Every hunter who uses the doll's services to become stronger is, in a sense, receiving aid from a reminder of the original sin that condemned their profession. Consider the profound horror of the curse's generational aspect. A young Yharnamite who takes up a saw cleaver to defend their family from beasts inherits the spiritual weight of crimes committed before they were born. Their noble intentions, their desire to protect, doesn't matter to the cosmic machinery of justice. The moment they embrace the hunt, allow the thrill of violence to enter their heart, feel that dark satisfaction when beast blood sprays across cobblestones, they become subject to the same damnation that claimed Gehrman and his fellows. The curse doesn't distinguish between those who kill for sport and those who kill for survival. It only recognizes the presence of bloodlust and marks another soul for eventual collection. The Fishing Hamlet priest's words echo through the nightmare with chilling clarity. Curse the fiends, their children too, and their children forever true. This wasn't hyperbole or emotional excess. It was a literal invocation that the cosmos honored. Every generation of hunters that followed inherited not just techniques and weapons, but a spiritual debt that could never be repaid. The blood they spilled in Yharnam streets was tainted by the blood spilled on that distant beach, creating an unbroken chain of violence that stretched from the first transgression to the last beast felled. Even the player character, the foreign hunter who arrives in Yharnam seeking pale blood, becomes entangled in this web of cosmic justice. They had no part in the original massacre, might not even know of its occurrence, yet by taking up weapons and joining the hunt, they inherit its curse. Their journey through Yharnam, their battles against beasts and kin, their eventual confrontation with the orphan itself, all of it represents another turn of the wheel, another soul processing through the machinery of punishment that the violated cosmos set in motion. The only way to break the curse, to end the cycle, requires confronting its source directly. The hunter must journey to the fishing hamlet in the nightmare, witness the evidence of the original atrocity, face the accusatory stares of the massacred villagers, and ultimately confront the Orphan of Kos itself. This battle isn't just physical combat. It's a reckoning with the fundamental sin that created the hunter's profession. Every strike against the orphan is an acknowledgement of guilt. Every dodge of its attacks an admission that the hunters deserve its rage. When the orphan finally falls, when its tormented existence finally ends, something profound happens. The black sun that hangs over the hunter's nightmare begins to set, replaced by a strange, peaceful twilight. The curse doesn't disappear entirely. The damage has been too extensive, the sin too great for simple absolution. But its active power breaks. The orphan's spirit, finally freed from its eternal imprisonment between life and death, dissipates into the cosmos, and with it goes the engine that drove the nightmare's expansion. The liberation isn't just for the orphan. Every soul trapped in the hunter's nightmare feels the shift, experiences a moment of clarity as the curse's grip loosens. Some, too far gone into blood, drunkenness, can't benefit from this release. But others, those who retained enough humanity to recognize their damnation, might find peace at last. Lady Maria, her vigil ended, can finally rest. The villagers, their call for justice answered, can move on from their eternal suffering. Even Gehrman, in his separate dream, might feel some lightening of the weight that has pressed upon him for so long. But the most profound change occurs in the waking world, in Yharnam itself, though few would recognize it. The beast plague doesn't end, the damage is too extensive, the corruption too deep. But the cosmic mechanism that ensured its perpetuation, that guaranteed each generation would fall to the same violence as the last, finally breaks. For the first time since the Fishing Hamlet massacre, there exists the possibility of genuine change, of breaking free from the cycles that have defined the city's existence. The legacy of the Orphan of Kos serves as one of gaming's most powerful meditations on the inheritance of sin and the price of unchecked ambition. Bloodborne doesn't offer easy absolution or simple redemption. The harm caused by the scholars and hunters of Byrgenwerth cannot be undone. The villagers remain dead, their transformation and potential lost forever. The knowledge stolen from their corpses has already corrupted Yharnam beyond salvation. But by confronting the source of the curse, by acknowledging the original sin and ending the orphan's suffering, there's at least the possibility of preventing future atrocities. The Fishing Hamlet stands as a warning about the dangers of dehumanization in the pursuit of knowledge or power. The moment the scholars stopped seeing the villagers as people deserving of dignity and began viewing them as specimens to be studied, they crossed a line that no amount of scientific advancement could justify. Their transformation might have been alien, their appearance disturbing, but they remained beings capable of love, fear, suffering, and devotion. The hunter's willingness to slaughter them for the sake of research represented a fundamental failure of empathy that the cosmos itself could not ignore. In the broader context of Bloodborne's world, the orphan's curse reveals the interconnected nature of all suffering in Yharnam. The beast plague, the hunt, the various nightmare dimensions, the madness that grips scholars and clerics alike, all of it traces back to that single day on the beach when humanity chose to take by force what should have been approached with reverence. The Great Ones, beings of incomprehensible power and alien mindset, had never been humanity's enemies until humanity made them so through acts of violation and desecration. The Orphan of Kos, in its tortured existence, embodies the consequences of treating the sacred as profane, of approaching the mysterious with violence instead of wonder. Its curse wasn't arbitrary cosmic cruelty, but a direct response to human cruelty, a reflection of the violence that created it. Every hunter who fell to blood drunkenness, every beast that terrorized Yharnam's streets, every scholar who went mad pursuing forbidden knowledge, all of them were echoes of that original transgression, ripples spreading outward from a stone thrown into cosmic waters. As we reach the end of this tragic tale, it's worth reflecting on what the Orphan of Kos means for our understanding of Bloodborne's deeper themes. This isn't simply a story about cosmic horror or the price of ambition. It's about how violence perpetuates itself across generations, how the sins of the past poison the future, and how justice, when it comes from forces beyond human comprehension, can be more terrible than any crime. The curse of the orphan didn't just punish the guilty. It created a system where innocence would inevitably become guilty, where the very act of survival in Yharnam required embracing the violence that would ensure damnation. The sunset that replaces the nightmare's black sun after the orphan's defeat isn't a happy ending, it's simply an ending. A closure to one chapter of cosmic horror that has defined Yharnam's existence for generations. The player character, having freed the orphan and broken the curse's active power, doesn't receive redemption or reward. They've simply done what should have been done long ago. Acknowledged the crime, confronted its consequence, and ended the suffering of a being that should never have suffered at all. Thank you, fellow hunters and lore seekers, for joining me on this deep exploration into one of gaming's darkest tales. The story of the Orphan of Kos reminds us that in worlds where cosmic forces take notice of human actions, our choices carry weight beyond our comprehension. Every act of violence, every violation of the sacred, every moment we choose expedience over empathy creates ripples that can return as waves capable of drowning entire civilizations. If this journey through Bloodborne's haunting narrative has resonated with you, if you found value in understanding the tragic threads that connect the Fishing Hamlet to Yharnam's downfall, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows these deep investigations to continue, helping uncover the buried truths in gaming's most complex narratives. Hit that notification bell to ensure you don't miss future explorations into the dark corners of video game lore. And remember, in the worlds we explore together, every secret revealed often leads to 3 more questions. Until next time, may you find your worth in the waking world, and may your dreams be free of the nightmares that plagued those who came before.